Hi there, Ramon from Memories, and today we have...
I'm Maria from Boston.
And I'm Rachael from California.
Hi there, and how do you guys know each other?
So we met on Instagram. We like to say it's like a love story. We met on Instagram and we found each other because we're both going through the same awful situation of dealing with our parents who have FTD, which is an early onset dementia that both of our parents got in their early 50s. So Rachel's in LA and I'm in Boston, but we're both young moms going through the same thing, and we connected via social media.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And I guess what inspired you to initially get onto social media and start sharing your journey with frontotemporal dementia?
I think for me, and I'll let Rachael say her piece, but for me, it was very isolating getting a diagnosis that even some doctors don't even know about, especially with my mom being so young. And I just felt like I couldn't relate to anyone. And so I knew there had to be people out there who might be going through the same thing. So I was just really motivated to just make some connection and get some validation from other people that might be in the same boat as me. So that's why I jumped on. And then once I realized the community was so small online, I thought, wow, the possibilities are really endless to raise awareness. And I decided to do that in a kind of unique way. My mom is an artist, and so I decided to post a lot of her artwork and intermittently post FTD facts. So I tried to draw people in with the art and then kind of educate them about FTD along the way. So that's my story, but I don't want to talk the whole time, so I'll let Rachael go.
I think mine is similar. I think where I differ a little bit is I wanted to talk more about like the feelings behind FTD in a way. I can't speak for everybody, but the suffering that I witnessed was something that I almost had to like vomit back out. So I held it and then I wanted to share it with other people. It is extremely isolating because it is such a small, unique, it's a rare disease. But I think what I really wanted to focus on along with the facts and all of that is what am I doing? How am I doing through it? So it was almost like a journal in a way. I know they have those like chat books that you can print off. And I wanted my kids to have that eventually when I have 20 minutes to sit down at a computer and print them off. I want them to know what I did for my dad and how it felt raising them while losing him. God forbid something happens to me. This is a teachable moment. I want them to be able to see like, oh, well, my mom stuck by her dad, this is family. And that's the most important thing. So it was kind of a twofold, like, of course I want to, raise awareness, but I also want to focus on like me, the caregiver, and how am I managing this? And what am I doing to hold the feelings, but also like be healthy and not lose, my mind basically out of pure stress. So that was my take on it.
For sure, and I think it's so beautiful. I think we hear that from a lot of younger caregivers, that turning to social media allows you to find a sense of community, allows you to contribute to that community by sharing a laugh and sharing knowledge. And I think it's amazing that you're also thinking about your kids and passing information along to them. So I love that you guys are doing all this for such amazing reasons. I'd love to learn about your individual caregiver journeys and how long you've both been caregivers and what the early stages were like for you.
Rachel, you can go first.
Are you sure? Okay.
Yeah.
So my dad was diagnosed with FTD in 2010, and it was a pretty rough journey getting to the diagnosis. It's a progressive disease. So his progression was pretty slow at first. And I remember one of the doctors kind of telling us to like imagine stairs. So they'll plateau a little bit and then there'll be a drop, and then they'll plateau a little bit and then there'll be a drop. Early on, we were living all together, and his behavior was just pretty self-destructive. And my mom, I was 22, 23 at the time. My mom made the decision to leave my dad, thinking that might like kind of jolt him to get some sort of help or seek medical advice, which he didn't. But after we left, of course, it wasn't like I just gave up on him. I would still try and see him. He would walk our neighborhood as often as he could, and I would try and catch him on his walks and make sure he was eating. And it was a really scary time for our family. We decided in the end to put him in a nursing home, for number one, for his safety, and number two, for our peace of mind. If we weren't going to be living with him, he couldn't wander anymore. He was getting kind of to the point where we wouldn't know if he'd make it home. It was really scary to see the person who is never supposed to get hurt get sick like this. Like, your parent is the person that raises you and takes care of you and comforts you, and he couldn't provide that for me anymore. So it was a very emotional time. And obviously putting him in a nursing home wasn't like, well, we tried. It was a very emotional, and it was a bittersweet, I guess, trade-off. Like, we knew he would be safe and cared for, and he needed that type of care. He still does. He's still in a nursing home, and he's towards the end of his life. I have 2 young kids. I can't almost have a third child at home. He was never aggressive. He was never mean, but I can't take that on as a daughter. So caregiving for me now looks like visitation, pre-COVID.
You bring him everything. You bring him
Right.
smoothies, you bring
Right.
him clean clothes.
Totally. I do. Before COVID, I was there every week, making sure he was okay, talking to his nurses. He has a roommate who calls him his best friend. Like, they have a great relationship. My dad is nonverbal, and this guy is a talker. So they really balance each other out. He plays in movies. I mean, the connection that they have, I'm super, super fortunate for. But I am still very involved. I just don't see him every day. So caregiving is I would love to have him at home with me, but it's just not in the cards for our family. So our journey was a little rocky, but when he was placed in a nursing home is when it kind of smoothed out, and we all fell into our roles that we still have now. And he is in a place where I know when I go to bed that he is safe 100%. Before, when we were finding out about FTD and what's going to happen, I didn't know what he was doing. Was he going to light the house on fire? Was he going to not wake up one day? I don't know. So it was a bumpy process, but I'm super happy with the decisions that we made and the care that he is receiving.
That's great.
That's amazing. And I love that you put such an emphasis on personal boundaries, because I think that's such an important aspect of caregiving. You can only care for the person as best as you can if you're the best version of yourself. And if you're a mom, and if you have 2 kids and a job and lots of other things to balance, it may, if you have the resources, it may be best to look for alternate places of care. And sometimes that can be difficult for caregivers, but I think it's important to have these conversations, because if you have those options, you're not a bad caregiver for wanting to pursue them. You're just doing what's best for you and for your mom. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Of course.
Maria, I'd love to hear about your caregiver journey.
Sure. So my mom was diagnosed in the fall of 2016. In addition to her FTD diagnosis, she also was diagnosed with ALS very shortly after. And I felt it was very important for me to move into my parents' home and spend as much time as possible with my mom and try and help my dad navigate like this punch in the gut that we never saw coming. So my husband and I left Boston. We moved to the burbs, moved in with my parents, and it was really hard. It's something I'll never regret, but we lived there for 2 years, and I don't know how familiar you are with some of the behaviors from FTD, but they can be really challenging. People with FTD sometimes have a lack of judgment. They wander. Like Rachel was saying, my mom would wander. I became pregnant when I was living there, and I had quite a stressful pregnancy, chasing my mom down the street, and it was very hectic and very kind of grief filled, because even though she's still alive, I was watching her change so quickly before my eyes. But about 6 months after my son was born, my husband and I decided we did our duties. We spent as much time with her as possible. And then with the encouragement of my dad as well, we decided to move out and set those boundaries and really focus on our family. But again, I will never regret that decision, but it was a very, very challenging time, but I do treasure a lot of the moments I had with my mom. She's still at home with my dad, and I feel like my caregiving role has kind of changed to being the caregiver for the caregiver. So my dad needs a lot of support with feeling good about the decisions he's making for my mom. My mom is also nonverbal, and my dad is a huge extrovert and loves people, and he needs that time, with me and my husband and our sweet son to relax and chat and help him problem solve different challenges he comes up with my mom, coming up with different, at one point we had like a companion that would come and take her and helping find the right resources. My parents were so incredibly close, and I feel like they were true partners where they made every decision together. So it's been really difficult for my dad to make a lot of decisions without my mom being able to communicate. So I've talked about this in support group a little bit. I see my caregiving role as caregiving for my dad now. He's solely focused on her, and I'm trying to focus on him and his health. So my mom is still home, and we still visit and help, but my role has definitely kind of changed over the last 4 years.
For sure. And thank you so much for sharing that. And I think something that I love about both of your stories is this almost emphasis on something that I've heard it referred to as secondary caregiving. You're not directly living with the person, but you're still playing a very, very active role in their caregiving experience. And I love that it's all two different versions, one being in a facility and one being at home with your dad. And I'd love for you guys, if you guys have any advice for other caregivers your age or just caregivers in general who are playing that very active secondary role, what advice would it be?
So I found a lot of, I know this isn't for everyone, but I found that being in a support group is very helpful. I also think therapy is incredibly helpful. Anything you can do to just set that time aside for yourself, and giving towards your health. I know for some people it's running or spinning. For me, it's talking to my therapist every other week and having that outlet. Because I think sometimes, we're all caregivers in the family in some way, and maybe we don't want to let out our frustration to, my dad. I know he has a lot on his plate. So I think finding that outlet to let out some of that stress outside of your family has been really huge for me. I'm sure Rachel has some great suggestions as well.
I agree with therapy, like tenfold. I mean, there's nothing the therapist is not connected in any way. So they don't have any bias to, oh, you left your dad, or, oh, your mom did this and your aunt did that. They are like a clean slate. So therapy is huge, and it has been. I've been going on and off for 10 years. I think another thing is managing the expectation. So that has been incredibly challenging for me. My expectation was my dad was going to live forever, and that's not true. It's looking at what is. So is he safe? Is he cared for? Is he receiving his medication? Yes, that's it. Above and beyond, oh, you got him up for a walk today. Oh, he's smiling while the piano is playing. Great. But my expectation is, I really hate to say it, but it's minimal. I just want him to be comfortable. I want him clean, and I want him somewhat engaged in something. Other than that, of course, I have guilt. I think I'll live with guilt for the rest of my life. And it's also managing that as well. I did what I could. I'm going above and beyond some other people. I'm lacking the other side. So I feel like I need to learn how to be comfortable in the decisions that I'm making, but keeping him in the forefront of all of those decisions. You know, I know he doesn't like pureed whatever. I'm going to say that, even if it makes his nurse uncomfortable, or, oh, the daughter's kind of pushy. I am his voice. So I think that is a huge piece of advice. I think one of the AFTD conferences there was a little breakout session about that. You become the voice for the voiceless. And that I've kept that in the back of my head the whole time. If my dad is laying in bed and he's kind of looking uncomfortable, either I'll do it myself or I'll tell his nurse that day, you know, he actually prefers to sleep on his side, or whatever the situation is. You have to fight for him because they can't do it themselves. I'm so fortunate that he's in a place that I trust 100%, but there are people out there who aren't. And I cannot emphasize it enough that manage the expectation, but also use your voice a little bit, and don't be afraid to seem pushy, or they need the care. They are still people and they deserve it. So that would be my advice.
And thank you so much for sharing that. I love that we got two different perspectives on that answer. I'd love to lean a little bit more into this conversation of expectation and caregiver guilt, because we found in these interviews that a lot of times when people are first starting, they tell themselves they're going to devote every single second of every single day to their loved one. They're going to have the best quality of life. Even if I have to kill myself, I'm going to just make sure that they're totally comfortable. And while I think that's noble, it's not realistic. You know, as caregivers, you're still people. You still have families, lives, careers, other things outside of caregiving aspect. Yes, it's a huge part of it, but you need to find a balance. So in both of your journeys as caregivers so far, what are strategies you've used to find that caregiving balance? Because it is very challenging.
You want me to go first?
It's hard. Yeah, you go first on this one.
I think you hit the nail on the head. It's a super delicate balance. And I think if you go one side of the scale, the other side tips a little. So you really have to keep it even. I think what I use for myself, my dad is a very sensitive and compassionate person. He put me on a pedestal. I mean, I was the apple of his eye. I'm an only child and I'm a daughter. So I use in my mind, what would my dad want for me right now? Would he want me to live panicking, stressed, angry, or would he want me to use this time with him to sit quietly and connect and bring him a smoothie and rub his back? That is sort of the balance that I use. And I am trying to live in a way to make him proud. And if he ever becomes a little lucid during our visits, or we, have a moment, I want him to be able to take a deep breath. The last thing he needs is to worry about me and if I'm okay and if my kids are okay and am I taking care? I want him to just focus on the busy board in front of him or playing the piano or drawing if he can. So I think that's sort of my, like a Richter scale. Like I want to make sure that I'm living a life for him and in a way to make him proud. Does that answer the question? I thought it did, but I don't know.
I was nodding a lot.
Okay. Okay. I'm like, was that even okay. That's my advice for that one.
So I was thinking the same thing of, I kind of check myself when I think about what would my mom really want right now. And when it came to make that big decision of leaving my parents' home, I knew that's what she would want for me. And I think it's all about, you gotta like be easy on yourself, and you really have to think of the bigger picture, and also acknowledge sometimes this is really hard. Like let yourself be like, this is really, really difficult. And I think that kind of lets you relax a little bit when you realize like, this is hard. I'm doing the best that I can. I think we're just like powering through. And sometimes I say to my dad, I call him a superhero because he's an executive. He has 4 kids. He's a full-time nurse to my mother now that COVID's going on. And he's a deacon in our church. And I try and sit with him and say, look at all the amazing things that you're doing. Like, let's take inventory of all the effort that you're putting forward. And I don't know if that helps, but that's what I try and do to reduce his guilt, because he's always going to think he's not doing enough. But I try and give him the picture of all the incredible things that he is doing. But it's hard. It's really, really, really hard. It's a very tough question that you asked, but I hope I gave you a good enough answer.
No, for sure. I love those answers. Finding balance is key, and thank you guys so much for highlighting that in your own experiences. I'd love to ask you guys individually questions, just kind of a bit more tailored to your individual experiences. So Maria, for anyone who may be watching who's trying to support a caregiver right now, whether that be a friend, a sister, a son, a daughter, what advice would you have to give to them since you are in that very supportive role to a caregiver?
Sure. One of the things that I have found to be pretty effective is not asking, what can I do to help, and doing things. Rachel's nodding, right? Because my dad will say, it's fine. Their feedings are fine. This is fine. Like, no, you show up with food. You show up and say, hey, I'm watching mom for an hour. Go for a run. You don't ask, because think of the 15 things I say that my dad does. His brain is going crazy. He doesn't even have time to think about what he can ask other people to help with. So, and I think I always talk about this with people going through anything. Showing up with a plate of food to someone's home is such a huge help. You don't need to ask, just do it. People can freeze things if they have too much. I think being a supportive caregiver is supportive of the caregiver is kind of anticipating their needs and not asking and just doing. Because a lot of those superhero caregivers out there will say, I don't need anything. I'm fine. No, you just step in, you be bold, and you jump in and do what you got to do.
I love that. And it's so simple, but it's just so effective. And I feel like a lot of people would really benefit from hearing that, that if you ask them, they're not going to tell you what they need. Just show up and be available to them. I think that's what they need most in that moment. So thank you so much for sharing that. Rachel, I would love to ask you a few questions about the transition into the facility. And I guess what that was like emotionally for you, because I find that kind of process is not, the emotion for the caregiver is not something that's highlighted enough in the mainstream. And I think you guys would agree. So I would love to hear your perspective on that.
Sure. So my dad's transition was a little different. He ended up in jail for a little while because of the behavior that some of the neighbors saw. from jail, he was sentenced to a halfway house. And that is where he started to eat from the trash can, do things that are just so inappropriate. And he was then sent out for a neurological exam. Fast forward a couple of months, we found out it was FTD. At that point, he had been out of the home for a few months. So the transition was, I think, a little different. He didn't go straight from our house to a facility. So for us in particular, having him in a facility was good. So he wasn't in jail. He wasn't in a halfway house. He was where he needed to be. I remember vividly when we found the place that he would live for a few years. He's now in a different place. I told my husband, I'm going to go and I'm going to pack up all his stuff and he's going to come and live with us. And my husband, his eyes got kind of big. He's like, okay, can we maybe like pause and think about this a little bit? I think the gut reaction is I failed. I can't take care of my dad. But what I realized is when he was placed in a facility, it was a breath of fresh air. I did carry guilt. I still do. But again, his needs are fully met. He wants for nothing. Here, at the time when he was first placed, I didn't have kids. Now, with 2 little boys running around, I could not manage it physically, emotionally. So I think at first, of course, it is emotional. There's that feeling of failure. There's the feeling of, okay, we're just going to get it. We're going to bring him home. Well, no, it's not. It's just not doable. And that is okay. Because our transition was a little bit rocky. I think when he did get placed, we were like, oh, okay, this is where he needs to be. I think also I made friends with the staff. So I went not above and beyond. I'm not like tooting my own horn here.
Yes, you did. I'm sure you did.
I would bring them cookies. I would, send lunch over because I know that their job is not easy either. So it's taking a look beyond yourself and realizing there's a team of people out there that they are willing to do this work with you. It's not for you. So even now with COVID, I get a daily call. Your dad's not showing any symptoms. He's safe. He's eating. He's happy. Okay, great. I don't know if all places do that, but that takes time and you have to establish that relationship. And I think that is really, really important. These people that are working in these nursing homes or facilities have patients who never get a visit, who never get family to come by. And that's not the role I was going to take. So for me, along with the guilt and the sadness, I also realized this is not such a bad thing. I can still see him. I can still live my life. I know he's safe. And when I go to bed at night, I'm not wondering did he eat his dinner? I know he did because I got a report. So it's not all horrible. And I know for whatever reason, this is what my dad would want for me and for him. He wouldn't want to be a burden. He wouldn't want me to put my life on hold to care for him. He's in the later stages of life. And I don't know, seeing it every single day, how that would play on how I'm raising my kids or how I'm a wife. It's just, you never know the other side. So I don't know what it would be like to have my dad living with my mom and her caregiving. But I do know for him right now, he's content. And that in turn makes me feel relief in a way. And I feel safe knowing that he's okay.
Awesome. And thank you so much for sharing that. And
Sure.
I think something that really, I guess, inspires me about both of your stories is the active role you guys have both played. You bringing food, being present, you know, for the workers in the facility as well as for your dad who's looking after your mom. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Of course.
I would love to. You guys are both moms. Yeah, and
Boy moms.
Yep. Yes, ma'am. Boy moms.
I would love to ask you about how you balance being a mom with being a caregiver, because I think that those are two insanely big jobs. To do them both at the same time is just very hard. And, you know, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there doing it, and there's a lot of people out there doing it who are having a difficult time. So I would love to hear your advice to any caregiver moms out there.
Maria.
Okay, I'll go first.
Okay.
So I'll tell you, when I was maybe 6 months pregnant with Liam is when I started seeing a therapist. And one of the things that we talked a lot about was that I was going to go from the caregiving role, caregiving for my mom at home, to then caregiving again for a child. And my therapist was like, we can't get you lost in this, because where are you if it's just going from caregiving from one to the other? And so I think it goes back to like finding that outlet. It's really challenging. Like, there's no way for us to sit here and say, it's fine, we find the balance. It's very, very, very hard. I think it's just really speaking up and taking those breaks and having whatever the outlet is for you. This is actually something Rachel and I really want to dive into in our podcast and do some side episodes about, because I think it's a really unique experience to be losing your parent while you're becoming a parent. There's a lot of emotional stuff that comes up in addition to the actual, like, you know, physical burden of actively caregiving. There's also that emotional piece to it. But I don't know. It's a hard balance. I think I have been doing better since I've realized that there's going to be some really hard weeks and there's going to be great weeks. And when we're in the great week or the great day, enjoying that and seeing what was making that work. Maybe it was that I got a couple-hour break or whatever it was, and just cherishing those good days, but knowing it's going to be up and down. And I'd love to hear Rachel's advice.
Oh gosh. So I have two little boys. My oldest is 5 and his younger brother is 3.5. I think what keeps it, I don't want to say light and good, because it's not. Like, I wish my dad could know them, is seeing him in them. So that's what I really look for. Is my oldest is a little serious and kind of like, you know, this is how everything is supposed to be. And my younger one is more of like kind of a clown. And I see him in both. And my oldest has this big smile and it can fill my heart just like my dad. So that's really important for me, to find the balance, is that even though they don't know him before he got sick, they do visit before COVID. They would visit, and there's a lot of questions that come with visiting him and why he doesn't talk. And if I get sick with a cold, do I have to be in a wheelchair? And a lot of kind of trying to understand what's going on. But I really keep it, at this point in their life, I keep it very minimal. But I never lie to my children about my dad. I never cover things up. I tell him that his brain doesn't work like ours does, and he needs extra help. And I think what I really enjoy most is the tender moments between them. And I keep that in the forefront when I am having a bad day. I also, again, I manage my expectation. If I know that I'm not in a good mood today, I let my husband know right away, like, I'm having a hard day. I'm going to need a little extra help. And I'm so thankful that I have a very supportive spouse. But managing the two, like Maria said, when you're losing your parent while you're trying to learn how to become a parent, is something that I don't even know if you could put that into words. It's almost like an intangible way of living. I can't explain it. You want for so much. Every Christmas, you're like, oh, I wish my dad was here. Oh, it's my birthday. Oh, I wish my dad was here. But along with the wishing, I have the memories of him, and I bring them up. Oh, you know, my dad used to love Christmas morning, and we would always make bacon. So let's go put bacon in the oven. I keep him alive that way. He still is alive, but I keep him with us by talking about him and by being really open with my kids. If they do have questions or they are scared, they do get scared when they see him because he hollers out quite a bit. I just, you know, he's excited to see you. He loves watching you play chase with your brother in the courtyard. So it's keeping it light in front of them, but also knowing like this isn't forever. And I need to look at the good and always hold on to that good.
Beautiful. And thank you so much for sharing that again. I love the idea of keeping him alive by talking about him, carrying on his traditions. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Sure.
I would love to chat a bit about how you guys met. I know we talked about it a bit earlier, and the project you guys have been working on, because I think it's so amazing, and it shows that, you know, this is a really hard time for a lot of people in the world, a very isolating time. And I think your story of just coming together from opposite sides of the country and working together on a project just shows that through social media, caregivers can caregive. You're not alone, right? So I would love to chat. I'd love to chat with you about that.
All right, Rachel, are you going to tell a story?
No, it's your story. It's our love story, but it's your story to tell.
So when I learned that my mom had this illness, I went on to social media to try and find other people who were going through the same thing. Because like we said earlier, it's very isolating. So I started following Rachael and her story, capturing caregiving for her dad. And I don't know, I want to say maybe 3 months ago, I had the idea to do a podcast to share the stories of people dealing with their loved ones with FTD or loved ones who have passed from FTD. So I posted on my story, does anyone want to tell their story? And Rachael, of course, was the first one. And
me, I do.
Yeah. And we quickly learned that like we had so much in common, being moms to young boys, losing a parent that was so nurturing to us that we were really grieving the loss of while parenting. And Rachael was just so enthusiastic about helping with the project. I'm like, let's just do this together. So we launched our podcast on August 3rd, on Monday, and it's called Remember Me. And it's called Remember Me because we want part of the focus of the podcast to be about remembering who our loved ones were before their illness. Because with this particular disease, a lot of times people just turn into a totally different person. They can have a different personality. And while you're caregiving, especially, it's every day